Seraphine Rhodes woke with a start, her entire body jarred by the sunlight piercing through gauzy curtains. Disoriented, she tried to blink away the blur that clung to her vision, realizing with a jolt that she wasn't in her tiny apartment above Graythorn Street. Instead, she lay beneath silky sheets in a room large enough to fit her entire living space twice over. The walls were painted a cool slate color, and the floor beneath the plush area rug gleamed with polished wood. Immediately, her heart sped up with alarm. This was unfamiliar territory. A faint pounding in her head reminded her that she must have drunk more champagne than she was used to. With cautious movements, she sat up, pressing the heel of her palm to her forehead in an effort to quell the dull ache that pulsed there. As she surveyed the room, she caught sight of something that made her breath hitch. A tall mirror leaned against the wall, providing an unobstructed reflection of the bed. And in that reflection, she saw her current attire. She was dressed in a man's dress shirt, a crisp white button-down, unbuttoned halfway down her chest, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Nothing else. Her cheeks warmed at the realization. The hem grazed her upper thighs, offering the barest sense of modesty. All she could do for a moment was stare, heart beating loudly in her ears as she grappled for any memory that might explain how she ended up like this. The night before began to come into focus. She'd been invited to a charity gala at an upscale venue called the Indigo Crest. It was a last-minute addition to her schedule, courtesy of a colleague who had a conflict and passed the invitation along. At the gala, she'd sipped glass after glass of sparkling wine, feeling a little out of place in her borrowed gown. And then, everything turned into a hazy swirl of music, dancing, and the impression of strong arms guiding her. A sudden prick of sensation on her neck made her flinch. She touched the spot gingerly and hissed in surprise at the tenderness. Sliding out of bed, still dizzy with disbelief, she padded over to the mirror. There, just above her collarbone, was a faint bruise, like a love bite, or some impulsive mark of passion. She stared at it, half mortified and half intrigued, her mind racing to piece together what on earth had happened. Her first frantic thought was that she'd lost all sense of self-preservation. One night of champagne and she'd ended up in a stranger's bedroom with a mysterious bruise on her neck, wearing his shirt. She mentally berated herself for such recklessness, but couldn't deny the flicker of curiosity twisting in her gut. She wasn't usually the type to let go, to indulge in anything that might be labeled scandalous or wild. Yet she clearly had. "Get a grip," she muttered, biting her lip as she tried to summon some measure of calm. She needed answers. Where was she? Who brought her here? And most importantly, had something truly irreversible happened in her drunken state, or was this just one of those near-miss fiascos? A sound from beyond the closed bedroom door made her heart leap into her throat. Someone was approaching. Before she could debate whether to hide or slip out quietly, the door opened. Seraphine half expected a smug Casanova type, but the man who entered looked startled to see her standing there, his gaze fixing on her with a mixture of relief and concern. He was tall, with dark, close-cropped hair and a face that hinted at quiet intensity. In his hands he carried a tray with a steaming mug and a small plate of toast. His eyes flickered to the bruise on her neck, and she saw regret flash across his features. Then he cleared his throat. "Good morning," he said softly, stepping forward just enough to place the tray on a nearby dresser. "I'm sorry if I startled you." He studied her expression, reading the confusion that must have been etched there. "You probably have a lot of questions." Seraphine took an involuntary step back, hugging the borrowed shirt around her. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "Who are you?" she demanded, though the tremor in her tone betrayed her nerves. He gave a slight nod. "Cashin Vale," he offered. "We met at the gala last night, or, well, we ran into each other near the lobby, to be precise." She searched her memory for a recollection of him, fighting through the headache that throbbed behind her eyes. She caught vague images of a handsome stranger supporting her when she stumbled, the two of them exchanging words that felt oddly intimate despite the loud music. Her stomach twisted at the next realization. That must have been when she'd abandoned her usual caution, dancing with him, maybe even. She flushed anew at the possibilities. How did I end up here? She managed, gesturing at the opulent bedroom. Cashin's jaw tensed. You weren't in a good state to head home on your own, he explained gently. I tried to call someone for you, but you refused to give me any numbers. You insisted you had no family nearby, that your roommate was out of town. So I brought you here. He paused, glancing at her uncertainly. I promise, nothing happened that you didn't want. You were quite determined, and I did my best to make sure you stayed safe. Seraphine touched the bruise on her neck, voice shaking. This mark. He exhaled, eyes flickering with contrition. You kissed me, he said simply, his voice low. It got a little intense, just for a moment. Then you collapsed. I'm sorry if that mark bothers you. I tried to keep things from going any further, but you were emotional. Horror and relief battled inside her. So they'd shared an impulsive moment, but apparently hadn't gone past that. She wasn't entirely sure how to feel. I was emotional, she echoed, remembering the swirl of frustrations and self-doubt she'd been feeling at the gala. I'm sorry. This isn't me. He lifted a hand in a calming gesture. It's all right. You don't owe me an apology. I just didn't want you to regret anything or be in danger. His gaze flickered down to the oversized shirt she wore. Your dress got stained, wine, I think. You insisted it was uncomfortable. So I gave you something else to wear. Self-conscious heat suffused her cheeks. Great, she muttered, feeling simultaneously mortified and oddly grateful he'd looked after her. The last thing she needed was rumors about her passing out in a stranger's car, or worse. Silence stretched between them. Cashin's expression was oddly gentle. Seraphine studied him, noting the fitted Henley he wore, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything about him screamed privilege, yet his demeanor was sincere, not arrogant. You can shower if you want, or I can have my driver take you home, he offered, keeping his tone neutral. I brought some coffee if you're up to drinking it. Might help your headache. Her chest tightened with conflicting emotions. She was in no position to trust him blindly, yet his presence gave off a sort of comforting steadiness that she couldn't help responding to. Still, caution rang in her head. I should probably leave soon, she said carefully, her throat tight. I appreciate what you did, really. But I need to figure out what happened and get back to my life. He nodded, not seeming offended. Whatever you need. He moved a step closer, handing her the mug from the tray. Drink, at least. I don't want you fainting again. Seraphine stared at the steaming coffee. Common sense told her to leave, but her body screamed for the caffeine, and her mind ached with questions she might never answer if she ran now. With trembling fingers, she accepted the mug. Thank you, she mumbled, taking a careful sip. Warmth spread through her, chasing away some of the lingering chills of confusion. As he watched her, Cashin's gaze fell momentarily on the bruise. Something like regret crossed his features. Then he turned away, as if to give her space. I'll let you get changed. Your dress is hanging in the bathroom, my housekeeper tried to rinse the stain. It's still a bit damp, but better than before. His words broke the tension in her limbs. Right, thanks. She didn't know what else to say, so she stood clutching the coffee, feeling 1,000 unspoken confessions swirl in her chest. He offered a small, polite nod and left the room, the soft click of the door emphasizing the hush that fell. Seraphine stared after him for a long moment, grappling with the surreal truth that she'd awoken in this man's bed, wearing his shirt, marked on her neck like some wild fling. Her usual life was careful, structured, and in a single night, she'd upended it completely. Sighing, she clutched the mug, letting the coffee's heat steady her trembling. She had only fragments of what had happened, a swirl of champagne, a suffocating need to escape the stifling frustrations at work, and then Cashin. His strong arms holding her upright on the dance floor, his gentle voice asking if she was okay. And apparently, a moment where her own recklessness led to that faint purple mark near her collarbone. She drained the mug and set it aside, realizing that despite the insanity of the situation, she felt oddly safe. Maybe it was his respectful manner, or the clear way he'd explain things. Still, she couldn't ignore that she'd never allowed herself such impulsive, potentially scandalous behavior before. What was she running from? Or toward? With her heart thudding, she resolved to gather her scattered pride and leave as soon as she was dressed. She'd slip back into her routine, maybe blame a head cold if anyone asked why she was absent this morning. Yet, in the corner of her mind, a stubborn voice whispered, this could be a beginning, not just a mistake. But for now, she pushed that voice aside. She wasn't the type to dive headlong into chaos, was she? And besides, how could she look at this mark, at his shirt billowing around her, and not feel like she'd already gone too far? As she walked to the bathroom, she vowed to piece herself back together, one steady breath at a time, before facing the man who'd seen a side of her she barely recognized as her own. Seraphine took longer than she intended in the bathroom, partly because the air felt thick with nerves, partly because she was quietly stalling. The faint drip of water from the faucet seemed louder in the silence as she inspected the damp dress that Cashin's housekeeper had tried to save. It still smelled faintly of wine, her memory stirred with the image of her stumbling, a glass tilting too far, the liquid splashing across expensive fabric. Everything about last night felt equally blurred and vivid, leaving her unsure how to bridge the gap in her mind. She turned her gaze to the bathroom mirror. Under the fluorescent light, her reflection looked both weary and tense, eyes shadowed with remnants of lost sleep. The bruise on her neck, a faint purplish mark, caught her attention again. She traced it with a fingertip, wincing at the tenderness. The shape was small, but it might as well have been a billboard broadcasting her impulse. She tried to recall the exact moment it happened, but she only conjured a swirl of music in Cashin's steady arms. A spark of mortified heat swept over her. She still couldn't decide if she was more embarrassed or intrigued that she'd allowed herself a moment so wildly outside her comfort zone. Carefully, she stepped out of Cashin's dress shirt and slipped into her own clothes. The fabric was clammy against her skin, clinging in uncomfortable places, but at least it offered the familiarity of her own style. She rinsed her face with cool water, trying to steel herself for the awkward conversation that likely awaited. Then she gathered her hair into a loose twist at the nape of her neck, hoping she looked more composed than she felt. When she finally mustered the courage to leave the bathroom, she emerged into a hallway lined with art prints and soft, diffused light. She hesitated, not entirely sure of the layout. The hallway opened into a spacious living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The view itself was breathtaking, buildings spread out in a glittering sprawl, and the early sun cast gold highlights on steel and glass. Seraphine glanced around, feeling like she'd stepped into a home decor magazine. Plush furniture arranged in thoughtful groupings, muted colors that spoke of sophistication without gaudiness. Her gaze flickered to the back of a figure standing near one of the windows, Cashin. He seemed to sense her presence before she spoke, turning slightly to look at her. He had changed from the clothes he wore earlier, now in a crisp collared shirt and dark slacks, as though preparing for a day of work. She swallowed, suddenly conscious of the tension humming between them. Feeling a bit more yourself, he asked gently, his voice carrying just enough warmth to ease some of her nerves. She nodded, hugging her arms close to her torso. "Thank you for, cleaning my dress," she said, feeling foolish for being polite about something so mundane after such a night. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble." He took a careful step toward her. "You didn't cause trouble," he replied. "I was just worried you might regret coming here. And I realize how it must look." Seraphine managed a short laugh. "It looks scandalous," she admitted. "But I appreciate you making sure I was safe." She forced herself to meet his gaze. Up close, she noticed faint circles under his eyes, as though he hadn't slept well. "Did you get any rest?" she asked before she could stop herself. His mouth curved slightly. Not much, he said. I kept thinking about whether you'd wake up confused, or afraid. He paused, as though weighing how much to reveal. Look, I don't want to invade your privacy, but you seemed pretty upset last night, beyond just the spilled wine. Her stomach clenched. Vague recollections of her own outburst tugged at her memory. A sense of having vented pent-up frustrations about her job, her life, how she felt trapped and overlooked. The recollection made her cheeks burn anew. She normally played her emotions close, never wanting to appear weak. I was upset, she admitted, curling her fingers around the damp skirt of her dress. I'm not really proud of letting it out that way. He shook his head. Sometimes we all need a release. Then, almost diffidently, he motioned to the sofa. Do you want to sit for a minute? I can have my driver ready if you'd prefer to leave straight away. She hesitated, torn between her impulse to flee and the strange comfort his presence offered. Eventually, curiosity won out. She moved toward the sofa, perched on the edge, back stiff. Cashin sat at a polite distance, leaving space that felt respectful rather than dismissive. Last night, she began, her voice uncertain, did I say anything about, well, why I was so emotional? His expression revealed sympathy. You mentioned feeling stifled at work, like no one values your ideas. You even joked about running away to join some free-spirited commune. A fleeting smile touched his lips. You also told me you'd had a rough week, a conflict with your boss, or something along those lines. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That about sums it up. Though I'm mortified I spilled that all over a stranger. We're not complete strangers, he said softly. We did exchange names, at least. And we danced. His eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. You danced quite enthusiastically. She groaned, face in her hands. Please don't remind me. I can't even remember half of it. I just know I must have looked ridiculous. He leaned forward slightly. You didn't. You looked alive. Like you were finally letting go of a weight you'd been carrying for a long time. Her pulse jumped at the admiration in his voice. She couldn't deny a spark of gratitude for someone seeing her in a light that wasn't about stifling or ignoring her. But it also reminded her how impulsive and unguarded she'd been, enough to end up with a bruise on her neck. She touched that bruise again, anxiety tightening her features. And that? She asked, not fully managing to disguise the tremor in her tone. I just want to be sure I didn't do something I'll regret more than I already do. His gaze dropped to her neck, then lifted. The sincerity in his eyes caught her off guard. You asked me to kiss you, he said quietly, and I did, for a moment. But you were tipsy, and I didn't feel right pushing it further. You passed out soon after. She inhaled, relief and embarrassment tangling inside her. Thank you. Really. Not everyone would stop. Cashin gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. I'm not a saint, but I don't believe in taking advantage of someone who's vulnerable. You deserved better than waking up and realizing you'd been used. For a moment, the room felt hushed, the only sound the faint whoosh of traffic outside the panoramic windows. Seraphine studied Cashin's features. He was attractive, yes, but there was more than surface appeal in him. He possessed a controlled kindness that she couldn't help being drawn to. Clearing her throat, she forced herself to stay practical. Anyway, I should probably call a rideshare or something. I can't go to work looking like this, she gestured at her dress, still wrinkled and damp, so I'll have to go home and change. He nodded. My driver can take you, if that's all right. It's faster and you won't have to wait. Or, if you want, I can lend you something else to wear temporarily. She bit her lip, considering. The notion of wearing more borrowed clothes from him felt too intimate. It's okay, she decided. If your driver is available, that's probably best. I'd really appreciate it. A flicker of relief crossed his face. I'll call him around. Should only take a minute. As he stood, he hesitated, glancing at her. Look, I know this is awkward. But last night, you also mentioned feeling stuck, like you had nowhere to turn. That really resonated with me, for some reason. If you ever need someone to talk to, or even a reference if you're switching jobs, I have connections. And I'd be happy to help. A wave of conflicting emotions surged in Seraphine's chest, gratitude, wariness, a strange sense of comfort. That's generous, she managed. But I have to handle my own mess. I'm used to fighting my own battles. His smile was gentle, not condescending. I respect that. I'm not trying to rescue you. Just offering a safety net, if you want it. He fished a sleek business card from his wallet, scribbling a number on its back. This is my direct line. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate. She accepted the card, fingertips brushing his for the briefest second. A spark of warmth shot through her, equal parts intrigue and caution. She felt the weight of an unexpected connection humming between them. With a murmured thanks, she tucked the card into the pocket of her rumpled dress. He disappeared down the hall, presumably to make arrangements for the car. Seraphine exhaled, rubbing her arms as though to ward off a chill. Her gaze drifted to the enormous windows again, where sunlight cut across the modern furniture. She couldn't shake the feeling that, for better or worse, something in her life had pivoted. Moments later, Cashin returned, phone in hand. Driver's on his way. He'll meet you by the elevators. He hesitated, then said, Can I text you? Just to be sure you're all right later. Her mouth quirked into a nervous half-smile. Yeah. That's fine. She winced at how shaky her voice sounded. This is all so surreal. He walked her to the foyer, where a large abstract painting covered most of one wall. She tried not to gape at the sheer elegance of the space. Everything reminded her of how different their worlds likely were. But Cashin's presence was calm, unassuming, as he retrieved her coat from a closet and helped her slip it on. At the doorway, she turned to face him, uncertain how to say goodbye to someone she'd met under such bizarre circumstances. The bruise on her neck throbbed, a reminder of an impulsive kiss that might haunt her in more ways than one. Thank you, she said again, more softly. I don't know how to repay your kindness. His gaze locked on hers. No repayment needed. Just promise me one thing, don't beat yourself up too hard over one reckless night. You deserve a little compassion, from yourself. A lump formed in her throat, and she managed a tight nod. Without another word, she slipped out the door, heart thudding. As she walked toward the elevator banks, she could still sense his presence behind her, a silent watchman in the entrance hall. She dared not look back, unsure of what she'd see in his eyes or what he might read in hers. Inside the elevator, her reflection flickered in the polished walls. The bruise on her neck felt like a secret brand, tying her to a man whose world she barely understood, and who had, in a single evening, seen more vulnerability in her than she'd shown anyone in a very long time. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the elevator carry her downward, away from Cashin Vale's penthouse, her head spinning with a tumult of questions she couldn't begin to answer. By the time the driver whisked her away, city traffic swirling outside the tinted windows, Seraphine caught herself smoothing a hand over that mark once more. She couldn't decide whether she was relieved to return to her usual routine or already missing the strange, charged safety she'd found in Cashin's presence. Either way, she suspected that no matter how hard she tried, her life wouldn't settle back into the neat lines it had occupied before. Something had been set in motion, the first step of a journey she hadn't planned for, but which might prove impossible to ignore. By the time Seraphine made it back to her one-bedroom apartment, she felt as though she had lived an entire second life in the span of a single morning. She thanked Cashin's driver with a hurried nod and fumbled with her keys at the front door, breath fogging in the chilly air. It took 2 tries to fit the key into the lock, her hands were trembling, a nervous energy running rampant through her veins. Once inside, She closed the door behind her and slumped against it, exhaling a long, shaky breath. The familiar scent of her cramped little foyer, the faint mildew in the hallway carpet, the half-finished stack of mail on the side table, everything pointed to normalcy, yet she felt light years away from what was once her routine life. She kicked off her heels, wincing at the dull ache in her feet, and wandered to the bathroom mirror to confront the aftermath of the night in a more private setting. Flicking on the overhead light, she squinted at her reflection. Her hair, which she'd managed to corral into a low twist at Cashin's place, was coming undone in tendrils around her face. Dark smudges shadowed her eyes from too little sleep. But it was the faint bruise, an oval shadow at the juncture of her neck and shoulder, that seized her attention. She had half hoped the lighting in Cashin's penthouse had exaggerated it, but it was indeed there, soft purple and undeniable. As gently as possible, she touched it, a ripple of memory dancing along her skin, the pulse of music, the dizzy swirl of champagne, the brush of his lips. Anger at herself flared briefly, anger for letting her inhibitions slip and for feeling any sort of pull toward a man she barely knew. She couldn't recall the last time she'd acted so recklessly. Her life was supposed to be about control, about careful planning so she could one day break free of her stifling job and find success on her own terms. Yet here she was, thrown off balance by an encounter that defied her usual caution. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the lingering adrenaline. Once she felt marginally calmer, she left the bathroom and threw herself into a change of clothes, sensible jeans and a knit sweater. The day loomed ahead, and she already felt behind schedule. There was no chance she could show her face at the office today, not after her unauthorized absence. Her boss would likely be furious, but Seraphine couldn't stomach the thought of fielding questions or rumors, especially if people had glimpsed her leaving the gala with Cashin. Sure enough, her phone chimed on the coffee table. She padded over and saw a string of notifications. Among them was a stern text from her supervisor, Ms. Danforth, asking why Seraphine hadn't clocked in. Another message from Dahlia, a coworker who thrived on office gossip, read, "Where are you? Heard you left the gala with a guy. Spill details." Seraphine's stomach twisted. She typed a quick reply to Ms. Danforth, something about feeling unwell and needing a sick day, hoping it might buy her time to compose a plausible explanation. Then she shut her phone's ringer off, ignoring Dahlia's prying. She'd deal with the inevitable questions later. Collapsing onto her couch, she let her head fall back against the worn cushion. Despite her exhaustion, her brain refused to quiet. Images of Cashin's penthouse flooded in unbidden, the panoramic windows, the tastefully modern decor, the calm steadiness in his voice. He was so at ease in that world of luxury, while she felt like an intruder just glimpsing it. Still, he hadn't seemed annoyed by her presence. If anything, he appeared concerned and oddly solicitous, offering her coffee, a ride, even help with her career struggles. The sincerity in his gray eyes had unsettled her more than anything else that morning. She patted the pocket of her discarded dress, fishing out the card he'd given her. A simple rectangle of high-quality stock, with Vale Investments in understated lettering on the front. On the back, Cashin had scrawled a personal phone number. She ran her thumb over the ink. "A direct line," he'd said. Her stomach fluttered at the memory of his voice telling her to call whenever she needed help. She didn't want to be the kind of person who begged for handouts or used someone else's influence to solve her problems, yet the gesture felt genuine, not patronizing. An incoming text pinged, this time from an unknown number. She unlocked the phone, reading, "Hope you got home safe. Let me know if you need anything. Cashin." Her heart did a small lurch, a reaction that baffled her. Why should she feel grateful that he cared enough to check in? She tapped out a response slowly, fingers hovering over the screen. Eventually, she settled on a short reply, "I'm fine, thanks. Home now. Sorry for the trouble." She set the phone aside, biting her lip. Could her life really go back to normal, or was it already too late for that? She found herself recalling the swirl of color and sound at the gala, the potent rush of letting her frustrations spill forth in a dance with a stranger. For so long, she'd held on to her dreams of escaping the marketing cubicle at her stifling workplace, yet she'd never taken a real risk to make it happen. That single, wine-drenched night had triggered a spark of rebellion in her. It left her conflicted, but also, dare she admit, alive in a way she hadn't felt for years. Her rumbling stomach finally reminded her that she hadn't eaten since some ill-advised canopy at the gala. She rummaged in the kitchen, throwing together a meager lunch of toast and leftover soup. Each bite tasted hollow. With an unsettled sigh, she moved to her desk in the corner of the living room, booting up her laptop to check emails. Ms. Danforth's formal notice about her absence had landed in her inbox, along with reminders of looming deadlines. Seraphine felt a headache building again. She typed out quick, apologetic messages about feeling under the weather, trying not to lie too blatantly. The last thing she wanted was to get entangled in more drama than necessary. Yet even as she stared at spreadsheets and marketing briefs, her mind drifted back to the sense of calm she'd felt in Cashin's presence, contradictory though it was, considering the circumstances. She wondered if he'd text her again, or if he'd sense her desire for distance. Perhaps he'd already concluded she was too much trouble. The idea left a pang in her chest. She closed her eyes and rubbed them, wishing she could erase the confusion swirling inside. Late in the afternoon, her phone buzzed once more. Expecting another office-related message, she glanced at the screen. Instead, she found a notification from a local news blog discussing the gala. Her coworker Dahlia must have shared the link. Seraphine's stomach plummeted as she read, "Star-studded charity gala sees mysterious pair depart early." Her name wasn't mentioned, thankfully, but it noted that Cashin Vale, the elusive head of Vale Investments, had left in the company of an unidentified woman. The piece was speculative, hinting at the possibility of a secret relationship. Cheeks burning, Seraphine closed the article. It was a small mercy that they'd left her out by name, but she knew rumors could grow fangs inside the corporate rumor mill. She found herself pressing a hand to her neck, once again conscious of that hidden bruise. She didn't think Cashin was the type to spread details of their night, but the mere fact that someone caught wind of them leaving together felt like stepping into a minefield of gossip. Already, her workplace and personal life were precarious enough. The last thing she needed was more scandal. Exhaustion weighed on her. Stacking her laptop aside, she lay back on the couch, flinging an arm over her eyes. The living room lights were still off, leaving the space lit only by the dying glow of the late afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. She tried to gather her thoughts, to find a plan. Maybe she would drag herself to the office tomorrow, face Ms. Danforth's displeasure, and bury herself in work until this fiasco blew over. Maybe she'd try to forget Cashin Vale altogether, treat the entire incident as a one-time lapse in judgment. Yet an insistent, stubborn chord inside her murmured that, given the chance, she would do it all again, the dancing, the midnight conversation, the wild moment of connection, even if it ended in a faint bruise. Perhaps that was the scariest realization, that part of her longed to break free from her own constraints. And Cashin, for all his moneyed background and polished air, had been the only person to see the fire inside her instead of dismissing it. As dusk settled fully, she finally rose to switch on a lamp. The phone lay silent now, no further messages from Cashin. Her heart felt oddly hollow, as though she were waiting for something she couldn't name. Resolving to push the uncertainty aside, at least for the evening, she busied herself with small chores, washing dishes, tidying up the cluttered coffee table, anything to keep her mind from wandering to a penthouse skyline and the memory of being pressed close to him in a swirl of music. Yet no matter how she tried to bury it, the faint pulse of that night refused to fade, echoing in her thoughts. In bed later, she tossed and turned, the sound of distant traffic drifting through the window. By morning, she would have to decide how to handle the aftermath, how to protect herself from rumors, how to remain composed at work. But lying there, in the dark solitude of her apartment, she allowed a single indulgence. Letting her fingertips brush the mark on her neck, she remembered the warmth of Cashin's presence and whispered a shaky question into the silence. Would she ever be the same again, or had one reckless night changed her course forever? She felt a hot prickle behind her eyes and turned onto her side, unsure if she hoped for the answer to be yes or no. The hush of the room gave nothing back, leaving her alone with the pounding of her heart. Seraphine woke before her alarm, the gray pre-dawn light barely filtering through the blinds. She hadn't slept well. Every time she drifted off, jumbled dreams replayed the events of the gala and the morning after at Cashin's penthouse. Sliding her phone off the nightstand, she noted the time, 5:46 a.m. Too early to head to the office, but not early enough to salvage another hour of sleep. With a low groan, she tossed aside the covers and began her day. By the time she stepped outside to catch the bus, the sky had turned a murky pinkish hue, promising rain. She almost wished it would pour, a storm might match the tumult still swirling inside her. On the ride across town, she stared at her reflection in the smudged bus window. The bruise at her neck was faint under a touch of concealer, but she couldn't help feeling it like a brand on her skin, constant proof of her recklessness. She tugged the collar of her blouse a little higher, grateful for cooler weather that allowed her to wear a lightweight scarf. Reaching the office building, she steeled herself for whatever rumors might be circulating. Her heart pounded as she passed through the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from a couple of co-workers who recognized her. The overhead lights in the open-plan floor were still dim. She was among the first to arrive. She used the quiet moment to settle in at her cubicle, booting up her computer and trying to focus on the backlog of tasks. For a while, she succeeded, burying herself in data analysis for an upcoming marketing pitch. The monotony of numbers soothed her rattled mind. But her reprieve ended when a message popped up on her screen, summoning her to Ms. Danforth's office. Seraphine's stomach gave a nauseating lurch. She stood, smoothing her pencil skirt and adjusting the scarf around her neck. Summons to that office rarely spelled good news. Ms. Danforth's office was corner-located, glass walls revealing her silhouette hunched over a desk. A small, neatly lettered sign read, "Director of Strategy," but the rumor mill had nicknamed her, the Iron Gate, for her unyielding nature. Seraphine tapped once and, upon hearing a terse, "Come in," pushed the door open. Ms. Danforth glanced up, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes as sharp as daggers behind frameless glasses. "Ms. Rhodes," she said, waving a hand at the chair opposite her desk. "Have a seat." Seraphine complied, noticing a thick folder on the blotter, her name scribbled on a sticky note. Ms. Danforth's expression was impassive. "I heard you took an unexpected sick day yesterday," she began, tapping a pen against the folder. "Care to elaborate?" Seraphine swallowed, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "I wasn't feeling well after the gala, ma'am. It seemed best not to come in and spread germs." Ms. Danforth's gaze flicked to Seraphine's scarf, then to her face. "I see. I trust you're recovered now." "Yes," Seraphine said, clenching her hands in her lap to keep from fidgeting. "Ready to catch up on any missed responsibilities." Ms. Danforth pursed her lips. "That's good. Because we can't afford lapses in the upcoming campaign. I expect your full participation, with no more disruptions." The slight pause around the word disruptions made Seraphine's skin prickle. Ms. Danforth pulled out a few documents from the folder, scanning them. "Your creative input has been valuable, but let's be clear, we maintain a professional image here at Arden and Finch. I won't entertain any scandal that might tarnish our reputation." "Understood." Seraphine bristled, forcing herself to remain calm. She recognized the implication. Any rumor about her leaving the gala with a wealthy man was seen as a potential PR risk, no matter how baseless. "Understood," she managed, tight-lipped. "Then get back to work," Ms. Danforth said, returning her focus to the documents. "We'll speak if anything else arises." Dismissing her like an errant intern. Swallowing her pride, Seraphine stood and left, shutting the door with quiet precision. Once outside, her pulse drummed in her ears. She hated how Ms. Danforth's disapproval reduced her to a bundle of nerves. That woman had a knack for making her feel like a misbehaving child rather than a capable coordinator. Returning to her desk, Seraphine found Dahlia hovering, eyes wide with curiosity. How bad was it? Dahlia whispered, stepping aside so they wouldn't be in anyone's line of sight. Seraphine let out a shaky breath. Mild lecture. She basically warned me to stay out of trouble. I'm on thin ice, apparently. Dahlia's lips pressed together sympathetically. Office gossip soared after you vanished from the gala. People said you left with, well, someone. She paused, her eyes glittering. So, was it Cashin Vale? Because the rumor was he left early with a mystery woman. Seraphine's cheeks burned, and she busied herself with rearranging papers on her desk. I'd rather not confirm or deny, Dahlia, she muttered. It's complicated. Just, rumor. Dahlia pursed her lips, but nodded. All right, I'll let it rest. But if you need a friend, you know where to find me. With that, she backed off, heading to her own station. Seraphine exhaled in relief. She appreciated Dahlia's concern but couldn't handle more questions right now. She spent the next few hours finalizing data for a brand outreach plan, forcing herself to concentrate. The steady click of keyboards and hum of conversation provided a backdrop of normalcy. Yet in the back of her mind, her phone weighed heavily in her purse. She hadn't checked for messages since leaving Ms. Danforth's office. A small part of her wondered if Cashin had sent another text. Lunchtime arrived. Co-workers bustled to and from the break room, some heading out for cafe runs. Seraphine usually packed a simple meal or occasionally grabbed a sandwich from the corner deli. Today, she craved fresh air more than food. She slipped out, hugging her coat around her, and walked 2 blocks down to a modest park. The sky was overcast, the air brisk with an approaching storm. She claimed a bench near a half-bare oak tree, pulled out her phone, and quickly scanned notifications. Nothing from Cashin. She bit back a hint of disappointment, reminding herself she'd chosen to keep her distance. Then she opened an email that nearly made her groan. Ms. Danforth wanted a progress update on the campaign by end of day. She had only a few hours left to finalize everything. She tried to relish the park's quiet for another minute, watching a few pigeons milling around for scraps, but her mind refused to settle. That last encounter with Cashin had left her with an odd mixture of longing and caution. No matter how determined she was to stay rational, the memory of his considerate gestures and the fierce protectiveness in his gaze tugged at her. She hated how easily her thoughts drifted to him. Clenching her jaw, she glanced at the time and forced herself to head back to the office, battling the swirl of frustration and curiosity that threatened to derail her day. The remainder of the afternoon was a blur of spreadsheets and frantic emails. By the time she submitted her progress update to Ms. Danforth, her fingers ached from typing, and a dull headache throbbed behind her temples. As she was shutting down her computer, her phone vibrated on the desk. She snatched it up, heart jumping when she saw the name on the screen, Cashin. A flush of heat crept into her cheeks, and she quickly turned so no one around could read the caller ID. She couldn't take a personal call here, especially not from him. But ignoring it felt wrong. Hesitantly, she pressed decline and hurried to gather her things. She'd try to find some privacy outside. Exiting the building, she half expected Ms. Danforth to appear like a hawk, but she reached the sidewalk uninterrupted. The wind had picked up, ruffling her scarf. She slid around the corner into a quieter side street and tapped Cashin's number to call him back, breath tightening in her throat. He answered almost immediately. Seraphine, he said, tone relieved. I tried to catch you earlier. Are you at work? She leaned against the brick wall, shielding herself from the wind. Yeah, just finished for the day. Sorry I couldn't pick up. Office isn't exactly phone-friendly right now. His voice was warm. I understand. I just wanted to see how you're doing. You left so abruptly yesterday, I was worried about the fallout at your job. A tight laugh escaped her. There's definitely tension. My boss is not thrilled with me. But I'm getting by. She hesitated, the words snagging on her tongue. Thank you for checking in. He paused for a beat, letting the street noise fill the line. Look, no pressure, but I'd love to see you again. Maybe we can have coffee somewhere quiet. I know you prefer dealing with things on your own, but it might help to talk. Her heart pounded, torn between the lure of comfort in his presence and the voice in her head cautioning her not to rely on him. Still, after the day she'd had, she found herself craving a moment of kindness. That might be okay, she murmured, glancing at the passers-by rushing home. I'm done for the day, so I guess I could meet you soon if you're free. He exhaled softly, almost a sigh of relief. I can be free. Where should we meet? She mentally flipped through nearby coffee shops, deciding on one that was a bit off the main drag, hopefully less frequented by her coworkers. Beanstalk on Willow Avenue, she said. Give me 15 minutes. Sounds good, he replied. See you there. She ended the call, pulse skittering with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was a risk, anyone from the office could spot her, and Ms. Danforth's disapproval still hovered. But for reasons she couldn't fully articulate, she needed to see Cashin, if only to ground herself after the day's chaos. Adjusting her scarf, she set off at a brisk pace through the late afternoon bustle, the sky now dark with rain clouds. As her heels clicked on the pavement, the familiar city scents wafted by, exhaust fumes and roasted coffee beans from a corner shop. Her mind spun with the implications of meeting him in public. Was she stepping deeper into something she couldn't control? Yet, with each step, a quiet part of her whispered that maybe she was done living her life behind fear. Maybe she was ready to see what else might be possible, consequences be damned. The wind whipped around her, cutting through her coat, and she wrapped her arms around herself, forging ahead. By the time she spotted the warm glow of Beanstalk's windows, she felt a tingling sense of courage building under her uncertainty. If her world was on the cusp of change, perhaps it was time she embraced it. Bruise and all, Seraphine arrived at the Beanstalk just as the sky finally opened up, unleashing a steady drizzle that dotted the cafe's windows. Warm light glowed from within, revealing cozy wooden tables, shelves lined with colorful mugs, and a few patrons hunched over laptops or sipping cappuccinos. She stepped inside with a slight shiver, shaking rain droplets from her coat, then scanned the room for Cashin. He was seated at a corner table, one that offered a bit of privacy from the main bustle of the shop. She approached hesitantly, feeling a flare of self-consciousness at how damp her hair must look and how the day's stress weighed on her features. But when Cashin glanced up, his expression melted into a genuine smile, something gentle and welcoming that caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. Hey, she said quietly, depositing her coat on the back of the spare chair. Sorry if I'm late. Traffic was insane. He shook his head. You're right on time. I just got here, actually. He rose halfway from his seat, an ingrained courtesy, then gestured for her to sit. I ordered tea for you, Earl Grey, if that's okay. I remember you mentioned you're more of a tea person in the afternoons. Her cheeks warmed at the small courtesy. That's thoughtful. Thank you. She settled into the seat, glancing at the delicate teacup set before her. It smelled faintly of bergamot and citrus. It's perfect. Cashin resumed his seat across from her, resting his hands on the table. She noticed he'd also gotten a black coffee for himself, the steam curling toward the overhead pendant light. There was a moment of silence, charged with the undercurrent of everything unsaid since their last conversation. How's work? He ventured, voice low enough that only she could hear. Any fallout? She let out a humorless laugh. Plenty. Ms. Danforth basically put me on notice, though she didn't say so outright. The vibe is that I can't afford another misstep, or I'm out. Her fingers tightened around the teacup handle. Corporate politics, I guess. They act like I did something morally scandalous by leaving a gala early. Cashin's brow furrowed. I'm sorry. I never intended to drag you into rumors or jeopardize your position. Seraphine shook her head, exhaling a slow breath. It's not your fault. I chose to let loose. I just didn't realize how tight my workplace is about personal image. Or maybe I just forgot how gossip-hungry my coworkers can be. She raised the cup to her lips, savoring the warmth. Anyway, enough about me. How about you? How's life in the big leagues? She tried to make it sound light, though her curiosity was genuine. She still had only a vague idea of what day-to-day life was like for someone overseeing Vale Investments. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to disclose. It's busy, to say the least. We're working on a major acquisition, a tech startup that's promising but risky. Lots of late-night calls, negotiations, politics of our own. He offered a faint smile. But I can handle that. I'm more concerned about, well, how you're holding up. She half shrugged, looking away to gather her thoughts. Honestly, I'm unsettled. This job was supposed to be a stepping stone to bigger things, but I'm starting to question if I can survive in an environment that values appearances more than actual skill. Still, I don't want to just quit. That'd feel like running away. Cashin regarded her, a gentle resolve in his expression. You shouldn't have to choose between your integrity and your ambition. If it's truly untenable, there might be other avenues, other firms or roles where you can shine. Or you might build something of your own. He lifted his coffee cup, pausing before taking a sip. You mentioned you have bigger dreams. Could they flourish somewhere else? The question struck a chord. She'd often fantasized about branching off into a more creative marketing role or even freelance consulting, but each time, the risk and financial insecurity had kept her locked in place. She set her teacup down, running a thumb over the delicate porcelain edge. Maybe. But for now, I'm still stuck. The bills don't pay themselves. He nodded. I won't push you. You know your situation best. Just remember, you're not alone in this. Her heart did a small, involuntary flip at the reminder. She glanced up, meeting his eyes, gray, warm, mirroring a quiet sincerity. Once again, she felt that strange pull, a sense that he actually saw her beyond the rumors. It was both comforting and frightening to be seen so fully. A waitress appeared, offering refills. Seraphine politely declined, but Cashin asked for a hot chocolate to go, joking that he needed something sweet after a bitter day. The waitress left, and the silence that followed felt almost intimate. She could sense the unspoken question lingering, what next? Did you hear about the gossip blog that mentioned you leaving the gala with someone? She asked softly, bracing for his reaction. I saw it online. They didn't have names, but I guess it's only a matter of time before more sites pick it up. He shrugged one shoulder. Yes, I saw. That's typical. My circle is used to the tabloids sniffing around. It rarely sticks unless there's some major scandal. But I worry it'll cause trouble for you if it escalates. It might, she admitted. My boss is paranoid about PR nightmares. She thinks any whiff of personal drama tarnishes the brand. Her mouth twisted in a grim line. Which is ironic, considering I've never done anything wild before. This was my one night of letting go, and it's overshadowing everything else. Cashin reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but hovering close, as if offering silent support. I'm sorry. If I can do anything, issue a statement, deny rumors, just say the word. She was momentarily touched by the offer, but also certain it would backfire. The last thing Ms. Danforth would want is a formal denial from a billionaire confirming Seraphine's involvement. That would only fan the flames. Thank you, she murmured, but no. I think the best approach is to let it die down quietly. He withdrew his hand, understanding in his gaze. The waitress returned with the to-go cup, and Cashin set it aside. Then let's focus on what we can do. We'll keep our meeting today discreet, though I hate that you have to live in fear of being seen with someone outside your office. If you ever want to talk about possibilities, alternative careers, maybe networking, I have connections you might find useful." She straightened, a flicker of pride stirring. "I appreciate that. I do. But I'm not looking for a handout. I might take a different job someday, but I want it to be on my merit, not because some wealthy investor pulled strings." A corner of his mouth quirked up. "Of course. And I respect that. Promise I won't meddle without your blessing." For a moment, Seraphine let the quiet swirl around them, watching the raindrops patter against the window. The lamplight overhead cast a soft glow on Cashin's face, revealing lines of fatigue she hadn't noticed before. She wondered if he, too, felt the pull of conflicting obligations, managing an empire while wanting something simpler, more genuine. She cleared her throat, choosing her words carefully. "I'm still not sure where this is heading," she admitted, gesturing vaguely between them. "I barely know you, yet there's this sense of comfort, I guess. It's confusing." He nodded slowly, fiddling with the sleeve of his blazer. "It's confusing for me too," he said. "But I've learned that sometimes the best things come from stepping outside what we think is safe." He paused, then gave a tentative half-smile. "We can go slow. Grab coffee occasionally, talk about normal stuff, like the weather or our favorite books. Or we can indulge in big dreams about the future, if that feels right. We don't have to label it just yet." Relief uncoiled in her chest. "That sounds nice," she said softly, feeling the corner of her lips lift in a genuine smile for the first time all day. They lapsed into companionable conversation then, swapping small anecdotes about their childhoods, how Seraphine grew up in a modest suburb, always scribbling ad slogans in her notebook, while Cashin spent summers at a family cabin that he turned into a private retreat for collecting his thoughts. The tension that had gripped her shoulders began to ease, replaced by a cautious warmth. The earlier sense of panic over Ms. Danforth's scrutiny faded, at least momentarily. When the rain outside intensified, Cashin glanced at his watch and grimaced. "I have a late meeting soon," he admitted. "Wish I didn't. This has been the best part of my day." Seraphine's pulse gave a tiny flutter at the earnest note in his voice. "I'm glad we did this," she said, ducking her head to hide the slight blush on her cheeks. "Even if it's a bit risky." He stood, gathering his to-go cup and slipping on a coat. "I'll text you, if that's all right. I'd like to see you again, even if it's just to hear about your day." She stood as well, picking up her purse. "Okay," she murmured. "I'd like that too." Then, feeling a wave of boldness, she added, "And, thank you, for reminding me that not everything has to be about caution and fear." His eyes warmed at that, and he hesitated a split second before gently brushing a hand along her forearm. "Keep that in mind, Seraphine. You deserve more than living in other people's shadows." He stepped aside, letting her lead the way toward the door. Outside, the rain drummed on the sidewalk, and they shared a final look under the awning's protection. She wanted to reach out, maybe clasp his hand, but the bustling crowd made her self-conscious. Instead, she gave a small nod, and they parted, Cashin heading in one direction, she in another. The cold dampness enveloped her as she walked, but a flicker of warmth remained in her chest, an ember of possibility that refused to die out. She found herself smiling at nothing in particular, ignoring the chill that seeped through her coat. The future felt uncertain, her job was still precarious, the gossip at the office surely far from done. Yet that quiet coffee date with Cashin had given her a glimpse of something else, a life not dictated by Ms. Danforth's disapproval or the rigid lines she'd drawn for herself. Maybe she wasn't ready to leap blindly into the unknown, but she no longer felt quite so trapped. Breathing in the scent of rain-soaked pavement, she let the city's pulse guide her home. For the first time in too long, she was choosing to let hope outweigh fear, one hesitant step at a time. Seraphine spent the days following that rainy afternoon in a constant tug-of-war between excitement and dread. On one hand, she felt a budding warmth each time a message from Cashin lit up her screen, a simple hello, or a shared link to an interesting marketing article he'd stumbled across. Their exchanges were short but genuine, giving her a sense of being seen and heard beyond the stifling environment of Arden and Finch. On the other hand, Ms. Danforth's disapproval loomed like a dark cloud, and every passing hour in the office felt fraught with the risk of making a single misstep that might ruin her career. Early one morning, a company-wide email landed in everyone's inbox, announcing that Arden and Finch had secured an important new client, Emeria Lux, a boutique hotel chain aiming to revamp its brand image. The email crackled with anticipation. This was a big deal, and a chance for the firm to prove itself on a larger stage. Seraphine, desperate for an opportunity to redeem herself in Ms. Danforth's eyes, found hope stirring. She spent her lunch break poring over Emeria Lux's existing marketing materials, brainstorming fresh angles. If she could get even a small role on this project, maybe she could display her innovative thinking without the baggage of recent rumors. Her chance came the very next day when Ms. Danforth summoned Seraphine, along with two other coordinators, into a cramped conference room. The usually stern director looked charged with purpose, tapping her manicured nails against a printed agenda. She informed them that Emeria Lux wanted a fresh perspective from younger talent, someone who understood modern digital campaigns. Seraphine tried to keep her pulse steady, but her excitement soared. Perhaps Ms. Danforth had chosen to set aside personal reservations and trust her skills, even if only under careful supervision. "I will be overseeing the entire pitch, but I expect each of you to pull your weight," Ms. Danforth said, her tone brisk. She flicked a glance at Seraphine, who sat upright. "We can't afford distractions or personal drama. Emeria Lux is too significant a client for any hint of scandal." "Understood." Seraphine felt the implied warning like a blade under her ribs. She nodded, forcing a calm expression. The meeting concluded with Ms. Danforth distributing research packets and giving a tight deadline to propose initial concepts. Despite the undercurrent of tension, Seraphine left the conference room buoyed by the thought that if she excelled here, she might change the narrative around her in the office. She buried herself in research, scouring high-end hotel rebranding case studies, analyzing color palettes and mood boards that might capture Emeria Lux's ethos. That evening, she stayed at her desk long after most of her coworkers had gone home. The quiet hush of the office after hours reminded her of how much she both loved and hated this environment, loved it for the potential to create something remarkable, hated it for the stifling rules and constant scrutiny. When her phone buzzed with Cashin's name, she hesitated a moment before answering, reluctant to disturb the hush. But her heart leapt at hearing his low, steady voice on the other end of the line. "Still at work?" he asked gently, a hint of concern coloring his tone. She admitted she was, explaining the importance of the Emeria Lux project. Cashin listened intently, then surprised her by suggesting they brainstorm together. "I have a knack for marketing angles," he said lightly. "After all, I've pitched to countless investors and partners. Maybe I can give you a few ideas, or at least keep you company as you bounce around your own." The idea felt both tempting and risky. She recalled the vow she'd made to not rely on him for professional advancement, but she also sensed sincerity in his offer. He wasn't trying to take over, just wanting to help her think creatively. In the end, her desire for a different perspective won out. "All right," she agreed in a hushed tone, tucking the phone closer to her ear. "But just so we're clear, I need to stand on my own when I present this. I can't let Ms. Danforth think I had outside help." Cashin agreed instantly, and they settled into a comfortable back-and-forth. Seraphine paced around her cubicle, reading out bits of her research while Cashin asked pointed questions, challenging her to think about Emeria Lux's target demographic, the emotional triggers that might set it apart from rival chains, and the story she wanted to tell. She found herself scribbling notes, spurred on by his calm but probing insights. Far from feeling overshadowed, she realized she was sharpening her own ideas by articulating them to him. Time flew. By the time they hung up, Seraphine's phone battery was dangerously low, and a glance at the clock revealed it was nearing 10 o'clock at night. She felt an odd sense of accomplishment, her mind buzzing with fresh angles for the pitch deck. Yet she also recognized a fresh complication: her resolve to keep Cashin at arm's length was eroding under the weight of his genuine support. He'd listened to her rattle off marketing jargon for over an hour, offering no judgment, only encouragement. She left the office exhausted but strangely content, the building's security guard giving her a curious nod as she exited the lobby. When she finally stepped onto the sidewalk, the city lights blurred in a wash of neon and lamplight. It wasn't until she was halfway to the bus stop that she remembered she hadn't eaten since midday. Her stomach growled in protest, forcing her to stop at a corner deli for a quick sandwich. While she waited, she caught a reflection of herself in the deli's window, hair disheveled, eyes heavy with fatigue, but a small spark in her gaze that hadn't been there in weeks. It was as though a piece of her old ambition had awakened again. The next day, she arrived at the office early, armed with a refined outline for Emilia Lux's marketing approach. Dahlia, spotting her at the break room coffee maker, gave an impressed whistle at the thick sheaf of notes in Seraphine's hands. "You look inspired," Dahlia teased. "Burning the midnight oil to knock Ms. Danforth's socks off." Seraphine smirked, sipping her coffee. "Something like that," she admitted. A memory of Cashin's voice flickered through her mind, how he had gently teased her about brand archetypes being like characters in a love story. She almost laughed at the thought, but kept it to herself. Let the rest of the office assume she'd had a sudden surge of brilliance from an unknown muse. They didn't need to know the details. By mid-morning, Ms. Danforth called a quick meeting to hear each coordinator's initial thoughts. One by one, her colleagues laid out standard fare, safe color rebrands, standard social media campaigns. Seraphine felt her pulse pounding as she stepped up to the makeshift podium in the conference room, glancing around at Ms. Danforth and the rest of the team. Then she began, weaving an idea about turning Emilia Lux into more than just a hotel brand, portraying it as a gateway to curated experiences that tapped into a traveler's desire for authenticity and story. She highlighted the emotional triggers Cashin had asked her about, though she carefully omitted giving credit to anyone but her own brainstorming. When she finished, an electric hush gripped the room. For a long moment, no one spoke, and Seraphine feared she'd taken too bold a leap. Then Ms. Danforth nodded slowly, a touch of what might have been admiration in her usually impassive eyes. "This is interesting," she said in a measured tone. "It'll need fine-tuning, but I see potential here, Ms. Rhodes." Relief flooded Seraphine so swiftly she felt a hint of dizziness. She left the conference room with her heart thrumming, ignoring the side glances from co-workers who had grown used to dismissing her as overshadowed. For the first time since the fiasco at the gala, she sensed a shift in Ms. Danforth's attitude, a grudging acceptance that Seraphine might be worth the risk. The feeling carried her through the rest of the day, though she couldn't help but check her phone more than once, wishing to share the moment with Cashin. He didn't text, likely caught up in his own meetings, but she consoled herself with the knowledge that she would have something positive to report when they did speak next. Around late afternoon, she finally got a quick message from him: "How's your day? Still conquering the marketing world?" She only had time for a short reply: "Going well. I think I impressed my boss for once." But her grin lingered as she typed. This was the weird balance they were settling into, casual updates that felt oddly significant to them both, each cheering the other from a distance. It was far from a traditional courtship, but Seraphine found it exhilarating in its own unpredictable way. When the office emptied out, and Ms. Danforth finally left with a curt goodnight, Seraphine exhaled. She stayed behind once again, reviewing small details on a color palette for Emilia Lux. The building's silence after hours felt different now, no longer an oppressive reminder of her precarious status, but a blank canvas for her creativity. She allowed herself a brief fantasy: if this campaign blossomed into a triumph, maybe Ms. Danforth would promote her, or at least keep her off the chopping block. The specter of Cashin's penthouse and the swirl of that fateful night flickered in her mind. Despite all the complications, her life felt more alive than it had in years. Just as she was about to shut down her computer, a soft chime alerted her to an internal email. Her breath caught when she saw it was from Ms. Danforth herself. The subject line read, Emiria Lux Concept, Additional Discussion. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. Inside, the message was curt but direct. Ms. Danforth wanted to meet Seraphine for a private discussion first thing Monday morning to refine the pitch. The email closed with a note that Ms. Danforth was, in her words, cautiously optimistic. Seraphine leaned back in her chair, a smile blossoming on her face. This was progress, real progress, even if couched in Ms. Danforth's usual severity. Gathering her things, she left the office buoyed by anticipation of the weekend. She wanted to share the news with Cashin, but decided to wait until the morning, determined to celebrate the small victory on her own first. The evening air outside was crisp but no longer stormy, and she walked to her bus stop with a spring in her step. The city lights twinkled, and she could have sworn they matched the sparks dancing in her chest. Only time would tell if she could navigate the tightrope of corporate demands and her unplanned connection with Cashin. But for now, the potential overshadowed the fear, and she felt a fierce determination to ride that momentum into the future, whatever it might hold. Seraphine's weekend passed in a blur of equal parts excitement and trepidation. Saturday morning brought a short flurry of texts with Cashin, where she confided, albeit briefly, that her concept for Emiria Lux had impressed Ms. Danforth enough to warrant a private strategy session. Cashin responded with genuine enthusiasm, sending a string of celebratory emojis that made her grin at her phone. She didn't elaborate on her jitters, nor did she mention the precarious balancing act she was still performing at the office. For now, she let his warmth anchor her mood. She spent the rest of the weekend cloistered at her small kitchen table, fine-tuning the visuals and message flow for the upcoming discussion. She double-checked her references, refined her bullet points, and tested potential color schemes. By Sunday night, her living room floor was scattered with printouts and sticky notes, forming a patchwork of creative fervor. Exhausted yet oddly triumphant, she allowed herself a single glass of wine before bed, well aware that she didn't want to repeat the fiasco of the last time she mixed alcohol and professional stakes. Monday dawned with a hint of pale sunlight filtering through the grimy windows of her apartment. She arrived at Arden and Finch earlier than usual, beating the typical surge of employees trickling in. The quiet hush of the open-plan floor gave her a chance to breathe, to center herself. Her reflection in the mirrored elevator doors showed determination etched into the lines of her face. At exactly 8:30, she tapped on Ms. Danforth's office door. The director beckoned her in, and Seraphine's stomach flipped at the sight of Ms. Danforth leaning over a spread of Emiria Lux mock-ups. Still half expecting an ambush, Seraphine forced a polite smile and set her own printed materials on a small side table. "Close the door," Ms. Danforth instructed. Seraphine complied, her heart thumping against her ribs. The older woman straightened, a sharpness in her eyes that Seraphine had come to associate with high expectations. "I reviewed your concept outline," Ms. Danforth said, tapping the corner of one mock-up. "There's potential here, but you've taken a rather emotional angle. Emiria Lux might want something more polished and elegant. You're talking about intangible experiences and personal stories. Is that truly the direction a boutique hotel chain wants?" Seraphine swallowed, reminding herself to project confidence. "I believe so. Their current branding is already elegant, but it lacks a distinctive heart, something that sets them apart in a flooded market. If we anchor their brand identity in personal, memorable experiences, we highlight why Emiria Lux is worth choosing over another hotel that might appear similar on the surface." Ms. Danforth's lips pressed tight, but there was an outright dismissal in her expression. She scanned a bullet point Seraphine had listed: create a narrative around each property, weaving local cultural touches into the guest experience. Pausing, she lifted her gaze. "You propose an entire microsite dedicated to these narratives, correct? And a monthly newsletter featuring behind-the-scenes glimpses of local partnerships?" Seraphine nodded, her palms damp with nervous energy. "Yes. People crave authentic connections when they travel. Emiria Lux can stand out by showcasing not just high-end suites, but a deep sense of place, collaborations with artisans, curated excursions, even story-driven social media campaigns. It's about making their guests feel like insiders. There was a brief silence. Ms. Danforth set the paper down, then walked around her desk, arms folded. The idea is bold, she conceded. But bold often wins in modern marketing, as long as it's executed flawlessly. Have you thought about budget constraints, or how Emilia Lux might balk at a campaign that requires more personal storytelling than standard ads? I have, Seraphine said quickly, flipping open a folder containing a breakdown of cost estimates. This is a preliminary projection of resources needed. We can scale it to their comfort, but I'd still push for at least 1 or 2 flagship campaigns that highlight unique stories from each location. A smaller pilot could prove the concept before they commit fully. She fell silent, letting Ms. Danforth read the neatly typed page. The tension in the room felt like a compressed spring. Seraphine fought the urge to fidget, recalling Cashin's advice about focusing on Emilia Lux's emotional triggers. This was precisely what she was doing, and so far, Ms. Danforth hadn't shot it down. Finally, Ms. Danforth gave a tight nod. This is workable, she said. I'd like you to refine these figures, and we'll merge it with a more traditional approach for a well-rounded pitch. Emilia Lux is meeting with us next week, so we have limited time. She fixed Seraphine with a pointed look. I'll be overseeing every step. No last-minute theatrics or personal entanglements. Understood? Seraphine understood the subtext perfectly. Don't let your rumored fling or any scandal disrupt this. Swallowing a prickle of resentment, she bowed her head. Yes, Ms. Danforth. I'll focus solely on delivering the best pitch possible. Good, Ms. Danforth said. You're dismissed. Gather the revised data by Thursday. We'll run a rehearsal pitch Friday morning. Seraphine gathered her materials and slipped out, the door clicking shut behind her. She might have bristled at the director's tone, but victory hummed in her veins. She was in charge of a crucial facet of the Emilia Lux pitch. Not only that, but Ms. Danforth had acknowledged her approach as something worth pursuing, albeit under strict oversight. The rest of Monday blurred in a frenzy of action items. She coordinated with the graphics department to draft preliminary visuals, scheduled short input sessions with a copywriter, and did a lightning round of brand research to see how Emilia Lux's competitors framed their own experiences. Each email she fired off felt like another block falling into place for her triumphant return to respectability at Arden and Finch. Late in the afternoon, she snuck a peek at her phone and found a text from Cashin, thinking of you. How was the meeting? She bit back a smile and quickly typed a reply while walking between departments. Went well, Danforth wants me leading a big chunk of it. Busy but thrilled. More soon. In the back of her mind, she recognized she was playing a delicate game. Ms. Danforth had made it clear she wouldn't tolerate any personal drama interfering with the Emilia Lux campaign. And Cashin, no matter how supportive, was a risk to that facade of professional calm. Yet each new message from him sent a small thrill through her, and she refused to ignore how much his unwavering cheerleader act bolstered her own confidence. By 7:30, she found herself again one of the last people in the office. Darkness pressed against the windows, revealing only her reflection in the tinted glass. She was cross-checking budget lines for the pilot campaign when her phone buzzed with a call. Glancing at the ID, she felt an immediate jolt of worry. Tamsin, her occasional roommate who traveled often, rarely called unless something pressing was up. Answering, Seraphine stepped into a quiet corridor. Tamsin's voice crackled with excitement. Sarah. I just landed in town for a few days. Heard something about you and a billionaire at a gala. My phone blew up with half-baked rumors. Girl, fill me in. Seraphine pinched the bridge of her nose, fatigue and amusement mingling. Tamsin, it's complicated. I'm still sorting it out, and I can't talk freely here. But yes, I met someone named Cashin Vale. The rumor machine overreacted, as usual. Tamsin let out a delighted squeal. The Cashin Vale? A philanthropic investor type, or so I've heard. Well, Ms. Rhodes, color me intrigued. She paused, then added, let's catch up properly. I'm not flying out again until Thursday. Will you be free tomorrow night for dinner? Seraphine hesitated, checking her mental schedule. She'd planned to bury herself in finalizing the Emiria Lux materials, but Tamsin was one of the few people she trusted to be real with. Maybe talking in person would help her parse through the tangled feelings. Okay, she agreed. Tomorrow night. Text me the place. I might be late, but I'll come. Once she ended the call, she gathered her things, deciding she'd done enough for one day. On her commute home, she realized how surreal her life had become, stealing glances at her phone to see if Cashin had messaged, preparing to reveal at least some version of her story to Tamsin, juggling a critical campaign that might make or break her at Arden and Finch. The question nagging her was simple yet profound: could she handle the emotional strain of balancing everything at once? That night, after a quick shower and a meager dinner, she found herself lying in bed, phone in hand, a text thread with Cashin open. They exchanged a few short messages. Cashin, how late are you working tonight? Don't forget to rest. Seraphine, I'm home now, actually. Exhausted but excited. Danforth wants me to refine the budget. I think I can nail this. Cashin, you will. I believe in you. A beat passed before Seraphine typed another line, her heart pounding in her chest. Seraphine, hey, thanks for everything. You've helped more than you realize. It felt strange to be vulnerable, even in a short text. She wondered if he'd reply with some polished reassurance. Instead, his answer came swiftly, for words that glowed on her screen. Cashin, here for you. Always. She locked the phone, pulse fluttering. That statement was dangerously comforting. She lay there in the soft glow of her bedside lamp, torn between the desire to let this new closeness deepen and the fear that any slip could unravel her progress at work. Gazing at the faint reflection of herself in the darkening window, she traced the spot on her neck where, days ago, a faint bruise had served as a visible reminder of her one reckless night. The mark had faded, but the memory was etched deeper than skin. Eventually, sleep claimed her. She dreamed of standing in a lavish hotel lobby, perhaps Emiria Lux, where Ms. Danforth watched her from behind a pillar. Cashin appeared, offering his hand, but every time she tried to take it, Ms. Danforth would clear her throat disapprovingly. In the swirl of the dream, Seraphine felt pulled in two directions, uncertain which path would lead her to the life she wanted. When she woke the next morning, the dream lingered in her mind, fueling a renewed determination. She refused to choose between professional success and personal risk. She would find a way to keep building her own future, even if it meant walking a narrow line between corporate expectations and the possibility of something real with Cashin. Gathering her resolve, she prepared for another day that promised to test both her creativity and her guarded heart. Seraphine's Tuesday began with a distinct hum of anticipation. She was to meet her friend Tamsin later that evening, a rare outing that promised both relief and mild anxiety. Relief because Tamsin always offered a safe space, anxiety because Seraphine would finally have to articulate all the swirling chaos of the past couple of weeks. Work, however, refused to relent in the meantime. She arrived early at Arden and Finch to find her inbox crammed with messages from various departments wanting updates on the Emiria Lux pitch. Apparently, Ms. Danforth had shared Seraphine's approach, and now everyone wanted a piece of it. She dove into the tasks, channeling her energy into triple-checking budgets and refining the color palette for the campaign's digital mock-ups. Despite the tight timeframe, she felt a small spark of pride each time she saw the concept come together, a brand identity that blended high-end sophistication with a personal, story-driven flair. Colleagues stopped by her cubicle throughout the morning, asking for clarifications or offering pointers. Even Dahlia popped her head over the partition with a mischievous grin, whispering, "They're calling you the new star of the department." Seraphine's cheeks flamed at the compliment, but she couldn't help smiling. The real test arrived mid-afternoon, when Ms. Danforth swept across the floor in her signature brisk manner, summoning Seraphine to the main conference room. Seraphine followed, heart pounding. She found a handful of senior staff waiting inside, including Mr. Alden, one of the key directors at Arden and Finch. They all wore measured expressions as Ms. Danforth set up a quick, informal review of Seraphine's updated materials. Nerves threatened to seize her, but the moment she started talking, explaining how each micro-campaign would build toward Emilia Lux's overarching narrative, she felt a strange calm. Questions flew at her from all sides. How will we measure ROI? Is the intangible angle too niche? What if Emilia Lux wants something more conventional? Seraphine fielded them steadily, referencing the data and pilot strategies she'd meticulously prepared. To her relief, each inquiry ended in thoughtful nods rather than outright dismissal. At the session's close, Ms. Danforth gave Seraphine an almost imperceptible nod, as though acknowledging she'd passed a crucial test. Mr. Alden even offered a dry smile, commenting that it was about time Arden and Finch tried something fresh. Seraphine left the conference room on adrenaline, scanning the floor to see if anyone else had caught the moment. Dahlia was there, beaming from her desk, and Seraphine couldn't resist flashing a grin in return. Buoyed by her success, she managed to wrap up her day feeling lighter than she had in ages. Still, Tamsin's dinner invitation loomed in the back of her mind. She welcomed the idea of seeing Tamsin after so long, but she knew her friend would demand details, not just about the Emilia Lux success, but about Cashin. How much was Seraphine ready to divulge? She clocked out just before 7, braving rush-hour crowds to catch a train to the trendy neighborhood Tamsin had suggested. The restaurant Tamsin picked, Marseille and Company, was a cozy bistro with flickering candles on each table and a chalkboard menu listing the day's specials. Seraphine slipped inside, scanning the space until she spotted Tamsin seated near a window, sipping a glass of red wine. The usual swirl of envy at Tamsin's effortless elegance hit Seraphine. Her friend wore a sleek blazer and statement earrings, even though she'd just gotten off a plane the day before. Finally, Tamsin said, standing to give Seraphine a tight hug. I feel like it's been forever. You look great, by the way. Seraphine gave a self-conscious laugh, brushing at her skirt. I've been stressed, but somehow it's paying off. How was your trip? Tamsin launched into a quick recount of her latest assignment. She worked for a global PR firm, traveling often, but her eyes shone with impatience. We can talk about me anytime, she said, but right now, I need to hear about this Cashin veil. And all these rumors that you're about to become some marketing sensation at your company. Spill. They ordered dinner. Tamsin insisted on starting with a charcuterie board and a second round of wine for herself, though Seraphine settled for iced tea, wary of repeating any mistakes involving alcohol. Once the server left, Seraphine exhaled, bracing herself. It's complicated, she began, then proceeded to recount the gala fiasco in low tones. Tamsin's eyes widened at every mention, the spilled wine, the borrowed shirt, the faint bruise on Seraphine's neck. Seraphine glossed over the more intimate details, but the gist was enough to make Tamsin gape. You, of all people, Tamsin said, incredulous. I thought you never let yourself get that carried away, let alone with a powerful stranger. Seraphine grimaced. I know. It was one night of bad judgment. But then, the morning after, he was surprisingly kind. He's been supportive of my career, even though it's risky for him to be involved. Tamsin's gaze turned shrewd. Risky how? She hesitated, swirling her iced tea. Because of the office gossip. My boss practically has me under surveillance, worried I'll cause a scandal. Cashin also doesn't want negative press, but he's not as fragile about it as my company is. She shrugged. It's more about my livelihood. If Ms. Danforth thinks I'm using him for an advantage, or if any PR fiasco blows up, I'm out. The food arrived, crusty bread, meats, cheeses, and olives displayed artfully. Tamsin nibbled a slice of salami, eyes still fixed on Seraphine. So you're basically stuck pretending there's no real connection with Cashin, while also leaning on him for moral support? Seraphine bristled. I wouldn't say leaning on him, she murmured, though she recognized the defensive note in her voice. He's just, there. It helps to have someone in my corner. Tamsin's expression softened. I'm not judging, Sarah. Just worried. Office politics can be vicious, and you deserve better than walking on eggshells. So, do you actually like him? Or is this all because he happened to be nice that night? Heat rose to Seraphine's cheeks. She considered the swirl of emotions she felt each time she heard Cashin's voice. The way he texted her at odd moments with a random thought, the gentle humor he used when she was stressed. It's not just him being nice, she admitted. I feel something around him. Safety, maybe. Like he truly sees me beyond my job title or a rumor. But it scares me, too. Tamsin nodded slowly. Understandable. But if this Emilia Lux pitch goes well, maybe you'll get the recognition you need at Arden and Finch, and some breathing room to figure out your personal life. Seraphine sighed, relief mixing with the heaviness that lingered under the surface. That's the plan, she agreed. I'm just not sure what happens if I realize I want more than just a few supportive texts. If I want, well, something real. Ms. Danforth would flip. Dinner stretched on, with Tamsin guiding the conversation toward lighter topics in between. They reminisced about their college days, the old dreams Seraphine once shared about launching her own creative agency, and Tamsin's wild travel stories. For a moment, Seraphine allowed herself to forget the tension at the office and the precarious connection with Cashin. But as the meal wound down and the plates cleared, Tamsin reached across the table to squeeze Seraphine's hand. Whatever you decide, I'm on your side, she said, voice earnest. Just don't let fear dictate your choices. You're too talented for that. Seraphine swallowed, nodding as her eyes stung with gratitude. After they split the check, Tamsin insisted on walking her out, hugging her one more time on the sidewalk. The night air was crisp, the stars half hidden by city lights. They parted ways, and Seraphine strolled toward the train station, head spinning with Tamsin's affirmation. She clutched her phone, half expecting a message from Cashin, though she doubted he'd text this late. She was wrong. Her phone buzzed just as she neared the station entrance. Cashin's text flashed. Hope dinner went well. Just wanted to say goodnight if you're still awake. Her breath caught. With a small smile, she typed back, just leaving the restaurant now. It was nice catching up with an old friend. Headed home soon. A moment later, his reply, glad you had a good evening. Sleep well, Seraphine. She pocketed the phone, heart fluttering. Tamsin's words echoed, don't let fear dictate your choices. If she wanted to keep the door open with Cashin, she needed to accept that it might cause ripples in her career. But maybe the risk was worth taking. She boarded the train, the sway of the car rocking her thoughts into half-dreamed possibilities. Images of an upscale Emilia Lux conference room played in her head, her delivering a pitch with unwavering confidence, Ms. Danforth giving a nod of respect. Then, the swirl of a different scenario, Cashin and her, stepping out onto a balcony overlooking the city, free from the hush-hush secrecy. By the time she reached her stop, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. She had Tamsin's support, and Cashin's unwavering cheer, at least for the moment. If the upcoming pitch could secure her position, perhaps she'd no longer feel so trapped between corporate expectations and personal longing. Slipping her key into the lock of her apartment door, she resolved to hold on to that calm for as long as she could. Inside, the dim hallway greeted her with familiar silence. She prepared for bed, discarding her blazer and heels, then sank onto the worn sofa in the living room, staring at the faint glow of city lights through the window. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and continue the balancing act, fighting for recognition at Arden and Finch while navigating the uncertain but compelling connection with Cashin Vale. For now, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, whispering silent thanks for Tamsin's friendship and for the small measure of hope she clung to. Pulling a blanket around her shoulders, she gazed at her phone one last time, contemplating texting Cashin goodnight. Instead, she tucked the device away. She didn't need more words this evening, she had just enough to keep going. The hush of the apartment enveloped her as she dozed off, mind drifting to the next phase of her campaign, both the literal pitch to Emilia Lux and the intangible pitch she was making to herself, that maybe, just maybe, a life lived with a little more risk could be worth the cost.